today's speaker. We invite everyone to address our assembly with words of inspiration, lessons learned, or passionate ideas. And remember that every opinion expressed here is strictly that of the person who gives it. Let us consciously and lovingly agree to disagree if it doesn't resonate with us. So as I mentioned before, today's topic is transitions. And our speaker today was ordained by the Fellowship of the Spirit in 2002. She's been involved with the Church of the Angels since 1999 and has accepted a leadership role within the church for most of those years. She is a stalwart part of this community. She works as an occupational therapist and currently supports other therapists as compliance director for her company. Her passions include this church, her family, nature, and her dog. And she runs too. She does run, not from anything, just runs. So it is my extreme pleasure today to present the Reverend Cindy Hudson as our speaker. Please welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, folks in Zoom. Good morning, folks here on site. Beautiful to see everybody out on I love fog. Somehow it's just like a wonderful time for quieting. And yet, we live in Northeast Ohio, so we know the weather transitions, like it'll be sunny by the time we're walking out. So it's all good. It's all good. This talk of mine today has kind of been morphing along the way. So usually I kind of finalize things and give it a dry run through, and I feel a little more prepared up here, and maybe not today. So we'll see what's going on. But, it's always such a privilege and an honor to speak with this group because you are such a wise and learned set of individuals that make up this congregation. Every one of you have special talents and skills and insights, and I love learning from each of you. So I'm hoping that what I share today is also going to be of value to you, at least a snippet here or there, something that is something different to consider as we talk about transitions. It's funny, last time I spoke was on 12/31 of 23. So I don't know where I'm always at the end of the month. I'm always on the 31. I'm at the end of the quarter. I don't know what that numerology is for me, but here I am again. And it's also equally funny that it's usually Easter that's a date that's available for me to speak. Because as I was kind of growing away from my childhood religion, what I'd grown up with, Easter was the hardest one for me to kind of wrap my head around. As I started to question things and try to make sense of things in a different format, Easter was the one that was a little more challenging. And here I am talking again on Easter. So go figure. But I also want to wish happy Passover to those who celebrate Passover, happy Ramadan, and happy Hanuman Jayanti. And I saw this on the internet when I was looking at something else because, that's the way internet works, right? And I thought, well, my goodness, what does Hanuman Jayanti mean? So I wished one of my friends who's Hindu happy Hanuman Jayanti because that's what the internet said I should say. And she said, thanks, but I don't think it's today. But she said, in any case, he symbolizes strength to lift all of one's burdens, and that blessing could benefit us all. Well, that's kind of cool. I'll still take it. He's going to lift our burdens. Yeah. So again, happy Passover, Ramadan, Easter, springtime, whatever it is that you may be celebrating. But today I'm going to be speaking about transitions, as you know. We see it outside because we know that we're transitioning from winter to summer. And it's said that springtime is that tug of war between winter and summer. And I like that analogy because I think sometimes winter wins, like a couple of Saturdays ago. Sometimes summer wins, like whatever it was a week ago, Monday or something. But it is kind of a tug of war. We know nature is transitioning. We know that our nation is transitioning. We've got shifts coming up with our politics, whatever that means, our culture, our national priorities. That's always in transition, always in shift, always in flow. As individuals, we're also constantly in transition or changing also. According to Scientific American, about 1% of all of our body's cells are replaced on a daily basis. So that means in about 80 to 100 days, 30 trillion cells will have been replaced. And that's the equivalent of a new you. You're totally new every 80 to 100 days. I think that's pretty cool. Um, and I think that, as we're changing on the cellular level, that's one thing, but we also are changing us, obviously, with our life changes as we go through our days and what's going on around us. That's always in transition as well. But I think it's interesting to consider that there is a whole new you on a cellular level about every 80 to 100 days. And yet, you look roughly the same. You might have the same thoughts, you have the same hair color potentially, although some of that shifts as well. Some of us won't admit it, but it does. But our eye color is the same, our traits are the same. So then I got to pondering what's gluing all of that together. And we know, science has proved there's DNA, there's our spirit, there's our soul, cellular memory. All those things kind of help keep us constant. And amidst all those changing cells, then it's good to know that we do have some constants. I'm not going to wake up with brown eyes tomorrow morning and not recognize myself in the mirror. Those kinds of things, right? And in Hinduism, there's a belief that there are three gunas. And these three gunas, they have attributes that are present in everything, both in the animate world and in the inanimate world. So whether it's a rock or a plant or a chipmunk, gunas are present in everything in the universe. So the three gunas are sattva, rajas, and tamas. And sattva attributes are sustaining. They're associated with selflessness, with balance, with light, and that's sattva, sustaining. And then we have rajas, and those attributes are energized, ambitious, creative, passionate, a lot of heat behind that. And then there's tamas, and that attribute is associated with inertia, sluggishness of mind and body, darkness, and some even say destruction, opposite kind of a rajas. So that all of these three elements, those three gunas, are present in any given moment. And I think that's true. We look at ourselves, we look at nature, we look at rocks, and they get formed, they decay, they become dust, and they get formed and decay. So there's that cycle. And the gunas kind of are a part of that. So a part of Hinduism, at least, encapsulates the precepts of transitions. And we know that in Buddhism, also, one of the main principles relates to non-attachment, letting go, excuse me, which includes letting go of previously held beliefs or behavior patterns or habits. And, it can be kind of a scary time as we're doing that letting go. Number one, I had a reading once from Gregory Keene, Reverend Greg Keene up in Lilydale. Maybe some of you know of him or heard of him. So he gave me a reading once and he said, I never let go of anything without leaving claw marks in it first because I don't let go easily. Right? And that's true. And I think that we're laughing because some of that is probably true for about all of us here today. But I thought it was a funny way of characterizing it. But, even for desired changes, such as choosing to marry someone or having a baby, these transitional times can be kind of scary. William Bridges wrote a book called Transitions, and he talks about the strange and confusing place of the in-between. And whether we choose a transition, such as choosing to get married or have a baby, or a transition is forced on us, like the loss of a job, there's a time of uncertainty and there's a time of being adrift. You haven't quite figured out how to be a wife or a husband yet, and yet maintain your own identity. What of you do you share? What do you mold of your new identity? What do you retain as your individual? And if the transition is forced on you, what next, right? Former identities such as wife or a school teacher or a therapist or whatever, those can be taken away. So where do you go from there? What next? This in-between zone then obviously can be very uncomfortable, and yet it is in this uncertainty is the opportunity for a new direction. So an opportunity for a new identity. People who've lost a spouse find a new identity as they get through the grieving process. And Native Americans, and again, there's some of you here that can speak to this far better than I, but they may go on a vision quest, which is a time of silence, a time to be in that neutral zone and perhaps emerge a whole new self. And so in that in-between zone, again, and this is where I have to divert to some other notes that came up, that in-between time, it's kind of common to feel lost, to feel afraid. It's a sense of not knowing who you are anymore. And from what I understand, for example, a vision quest, and there's a lot of forms in a vision quest, in other religious practices as well. But a vision quest can be really uncomfortable on a lot of levels. There's necessarily no food and no shelter, and nothing seems secure anymore from what you're used to. Transitions can be uncomfortable in a very similar way. And yet the wait to emerge from this period is then stressful. But we know that change must occur because nothing stays the same. In order to grow, we have to then go through this difficult phase. We're not who we were. We're not who we're yet to become. There's this phase of in between. Winston Churchill is attributed of saying, if you're going through hell, keep going. You don't want to stay there, but that in-between zone is kind of a holding pattern where you're still evolving. And in our typical American culture, waiting isn't something that we're necessarily real skilled at. So these in-between times are super uncomfortable, I think, especially for us typical Americans, because we want to know what's next. We want to get to that goal. We're goal-oriented. We want it when? We want it now, right? Okay, it's hard to wait. But transitions have to include that in-between zone time so that we can evolve and we can emerge as we are meant to be. So, obviously we talk about nature. We've got butterflies emerging from a chrysalis. This time of year, there's a lot of pictures of little chicks pecking through those eggshells, right? The seedling pushing through the soil, getting through the earth. But it's all hard work. It's all hard work to become fully what you were meant to be. Whether it's a chick, a butterfly, a human, it's all hard work as we peck through our shells. So today, being Easter, I consider the hard work that Christ did while he was in the physical. And if we're to believe in the Easter story either as an allegory or as in biblical literalism, whether you take the Bible as a concrete story, I don't think many of us do here in this church. Maybe a lot of the stories in the Bible are more of an allegory. Christ's transition can be an example for our own lives. And I found something written by Jim Palmer. I don't know if people are familiar with Jim Palmer. Have people heard of him? I haven't heard of him. Again, this is like yesterday. Things were morphing as I morphed through my day. I'd like to learn more about this gentleman, but he was a reverend, an ordained minister, and served at one of the mega churches in the Chicago area. And then he was a leader of several other churches. And in the year 2000, he kind of felt like that Christian doctrine that he had, grown up with and went to theological school for didn't fit anymore. And so he kind of began to create his own thoughts, his own interpretations, his own impression of the meaning of Christ, stories in the Bible. He wrote books on this, and so he's somebody I'd like to know more about. But one of the readings that I read that was from Jim Palmer, these are his words now. Jesus spoke to them. This is his interpretation of one of the stories of the Bible. Jesus spoke to them, saying it was time for him to leave. His friends were distraught upon hearing the news. They said in disbelief, "You cannot go, Jesus. How shall we carry on without you?" Jesus replied, "You must find me in yourself." "How is that possible?" one said. "Will you step inside us? Will you live there forever?" Jesus explained, "The life you have seen in, as, and through me is also your life. We share that one life together. If I stay longer, you'll become convinced that this is about me and miss the life I am referring to, which is also in you, as you, and through you." After a few moments of silence, one of them asked Jesus, "But should we not elevate you to the highest place among men and worship you?" "Only do as I did and heed that life and spirit that is within you. Listen to its promptings. Follow what it shows you and tells you. That is the way." After speaking these words, Jesus turned and walked away. At some distance, one of them called out, "But Jesus, should the world not know about you?" He stopped and turned and said with compassion in his eyes, "Don't you see? This was never about me. It was always you. You be the Jesus now." Jim Palmer goes on. This is from a religion-free Bible, and is some of Jim Palmer's interpretations of the stories. And he goes on to say, and these are Jim Palmer's words now, "I wrote the above passage some years ago, but every time when reading it, I tear up. I imagine this story and Jesus' closest friends feeling a deep and fearful loss at the news of Jesus' departure. In my mind's eye, I can see Jesus turning back with wet eyes to say, "It was always you." It grieves me that these stories are often hijacked by religion to make some sort of theological point. For me, the point of the story is that Jesus knew his death was imminent and was preparing his closest friends for that fact. It turned out being one of the greatest teaching moments of their time together. Jesus had to go, and it was time for them to lay hold of the truth that he had taught and lived. They thought that truth had something to do with how great Jesus was. But in a divine sleight of hand, Jesus tore the script in two and said, "It's you." Powerful stuff, huh? Powerful stuff. And I think, we think about the word transition, and in a spiritualist church, often transition also means when someone goes from being in the physical to being in spirit. And Jesus made a heck of a transition, right? Powerful stuff. So through our struggles, we can find change, we can emerge as a whole new being. Christ had to leave his physical form to emerge and to evolve into the spirit that has taught millions of lives and touched millions of lives. He left the chrysalis, he left the egg, he left the tomb to be what he was meant to be. Again, I'm not sure humanity always has quite the accurate understanding of the meaning of his life, but there you have it. Revelations 21:5, Christ says, "Behold, I make all things new." So it may be that in following Christ's extreme example, surrendering the familiar, going through that in-between stage, we too can be transformed. We can transition. We can welcome the energy of newness, of springtime and renewal. And I thank you for your kind attention today. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Comment or questions? Yeah, stay here.
Yeah,
Sure, Mark.
so you talked about that transition time and when you're letting go of the old and bringing in the new, and you're undoing and you're doing and you're unlearning and you're learning. I know for me on my path, it's not easy to do, but because it's not easy to do doesn't mean that I should walk away from it when it's difficult.
Yes.
It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fall down. You get back up and you keep going and you learn from it. That's like one of the most important teachings, that it's okay to fall down. And it's not a big deal to do. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And that's such a huge part of making that transition. You learn a lot of humility. You learn how to let things go. Yeah, those vision quests can be pretty tough. But it's the surrendering. Once you get that, everything is good.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark, because I absolutely would agree with you. And I also think that one of my other teachers said that you never step in the same river twice. So you may be learning or trying to do a new habit or embrace all this growth that we try to do. And we think, here I am again, making the same, choices that I wish I hadn't made. Well, you're never in the same river twice because you have the opportunity to learn and grow. So I know Dave had his hand up too, and yeah.
I agree. I totally agree with Mark, obviously. And what I just wanted to add is the other lesson here is that when we see others going through their journey of tough times, not to be judgmental of their humanity.
Awesome point.
Another
Yeah.
American.
Yeah, not to judge. And for the people on Zoom, that's an important addition, is that when people are going through their in-between times and that discomfort, their own vision quest on whatever level, not to judge, because it's where they're at in the moment. Yeah, thank you, Dave. And we have other hands up too, and we'll get this side too.
The funny thing that has to do with what Dave said is I was thinking that, a lot of times when we see people going through transitions, we want to help them and we want to be kind to them. Probably if they're close to us, we're more judgy, but like somebody else, you want to help them. And I think we really need to remember that when we're going through any transitions of our own, we need to treat ourselves with that same kindness that we treat others, because
Yeah.
we are our own worst judges, you know, and
Yeah.
transition is tough without you judging yourself about it.
Yeah, I think your transitions are tough enough. You don't need to judge yourself when you're in those difficult in-between zones. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and then over here we had some hands. Reverend Carol?
Okay, so what you read from, was it Jim Palmer, you said? Resonated with a series of books I'm reading at this time, and it's called Lessons and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. And there's 5 books. Very impacting, and it correlates with what you read. It also talks that Jesus did not come here to be the catch-all. He, as they said, and these books were written in the late 1800s, and it was a 3-year journey through, it was this, I can't even talk about it. It's just like so amazing. And I can only read like a partial of a chapter or one chapter at a time. And then it takes me all day to wrap my head around what I've just read. Wow. It's so impacting. Mm-hmm. But they talked about how Jesus was just a man, okay? He came here to show us, as we know, how to be. One of the quotes was like, Buddha taught us how to become enlightened. Jesus showed us how to be enlightened. And when we say Christ, he was just Jesus. He wasn't Jesus Christ. The Christ is the Christ consciousness within you, and he was the perfect example of being in tune and on the highest level of being the Christ conscious. Yes. And that's what he showed us. It's not hard to be, but it is a journey. You will fall down, but you get back up. But when you read that, I'm just like, that's exactly what I'm reading about. And I mean, each book is about a certain thing. So this book, the next one that I'm reading, I'm just like, oh man, it takes me like, okay, I read a chapter. I can't even go back into it right now because something moves. I'll tell you, when
it's loaded, huh?
It, like, you would not believe, it's like a machine gun. it's just on and on and on. I'm hoping to get through this and maybe hopefully conglomerate this and kind of like come up here and talk a little bit. Mm-hmm. But you know, it's just
intense. It sounds.
It's man, very much so.
Well, it's written from the Christ consciousness.
Yes,
all 5 books.
So did you read those books? Because I saw you.
Yeah, wait till you get to book 3. And if you're having trouble,
I'm very close to that
book
one.
1 and book 2.
I am very close. I'm very close. But it's
why?
I'm sorry, the energy is getting me. Okay. I'm good.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Then Anthony?
We all have that Christ-like energy within us, you know, and I think those representations, especially the messages, are that we have everything we need within us to be in this world but not of it. You know, to share compassion and love, forgiveness, non-judgment, joy, just joy. You know, joy is God. And so your message has definitely resonated with me today because when we feel like we're going backwards, what we're doing is we're opening our hearts even deeper to express divinity throughout our Christ energy that we hold within all of us. We have all the power we need, we have the healing abilities, we have all the divine love, we have all the support. We didn't come here alone. And we didn't come here to do this alone. So I thank you for bringing that message through today. And I think that resonated within a lot of people also, and also the messages and representation of this church, that we are always free and that we create these limitations within our beliefs when we feel like we're stuck. But after we free ourselves, we peel the layer of the onion. I'm learning this too. The deeper our hearts open, the more we experience and we realize we're holding on to that no longer serves.
That's a great point too. No matter what you're going through, keep your heart open. Don't shut down. Yeah.
Right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great message for Easter Sunday, and thank you if you don't believe in the story from the Bible for putting up with it. But clearly, Reverend Cindy could make the jump for everyone, no matter what you believe.